Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. My name is Stephen Jones. I'm the chairman of the PMC SIG, which is Planning, Monitoring and Control, and this webinar is in conjunction with the ProgM SIG as well. They've done all the organisation. We've got something coming up in January, on January the 21st, again associated with complex risk, agile and benefits, and that will be held at Warwick University on the 21st of January. There's also another event which you might be interested in, which is coming up quite shortly. It's not an APM event, but it is one we are supporting, which is Making Projects Fly. For further information, you can check out the EVA in the UK website. Our speaker today is Carolyn. She works for Harmonic. I will actually let Carolyn introduce herself.
So good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this, which is my very first webinar as well. So just as a means of introduction, my name is Carolyn Limbert and I work as the Principal Planner for Harmonic Limited, which is a professional services provider working across multiple industries, helping businesses deliver profitable growth through winning and successfully delivering complex projects and programs. My personal experience lies mainly within the defence sector, where I've worked for a number of large-scale defence companies such as AWE, Lockheed Martin, the Aircraft Carrier Alliance and BAE Systems on some of their most complex projects. I've also been involved in classified projects, which introduces an extra level of complexity to the environment. As Steve said, I'm a committee member of the Planning, Monitoring and Control Special Interest Group for the APM, and as a planner by trade, I take a keen interest in project planning and controls, especially within complex and changing environments. So I'm going to be talking to you today about making progress in an uncertain world. The landscape we find ourselves in often demands of us to deliver more for less, delivering faster and to higher quality levels. And this means that sometimes it's difficult to make progress when external factors change around you, altering the goalposts and making the path ahead seem very unclear. So during this webinar we will explore the complex landscape of programs and projects and focus in on some potential strategies to help manage this ever-changing environment. Through focusing in on key elements of the landscape, I'll talk through some suggested approaches to help influence and control areas of your delivery space and to help you navigate more clearly through the delivery journey of any project or program. I'll then spend some time talking through proactive decision making and the importance of making tangible progress. Then finally, I'll recap and ask you to take 5 key things away with you to consider and apply in your own local project or program environment. So let's launch straight into thinking about the realities of delivery. Think about the challenges of delivery and how that relates to the APM lifecycle. Start off by thinking about how certainty of scope changes over time. In other words, throughout the life cycle, how does your understanding of the what change in terms of how certain are you on what you need to deliver? Then start to think about how the certainty of the delivery. In other words, throughout the life cycle, how does the understanding of the how change? How are we going to deliver what we know we need to deliver? So if I plot this over the standard APM project lifecycle, then traditional thinking shows that as you move through the lifecycle, you're gradually reducing uncertainty as you progress, understanding objectives and scope up front, then incrementally implementing the objectives throughout the implementation phase. Both risk and uncertainty is reduced throughout the project lifecycle before you deliver successfully at the end. Now this looks great on paper, but has anybody ever worked on a project where things have gone this smoothly? Perhaps simple in theory, but not so much in practice. So more often nowadays, you see projects that have incomplete and undefined objectives and scope, right the way through to mobilisation and through into implementation. This means that the project is stuck in a state where there's a high level of uncertainty as to both what the scope or objectives are and then how to implement and deliver them. This means that by some miracle the project has to launch itself from an area of high uncertainty to an area of low uncertainty in one phase of the life cycle, which is a difficult task, especially if your environment changes around you at the same time. So let's now begin to focus in on a project's environment more closely. Traditional PM dimensions can be summarised in the well-known triangle of performance, cost and time. In order to be successful, you need to control these three aspects to successfully deliver a project. Now we all know that when you try and put that magic combination into practice, it's not as easy as it looks on paper. Reality takes over, and as you try and control these aspects, other things get in the way. Now, in analysing their project success factors, the Highways Research Programme added another 2 dimensions into their view of project management, which they deemed are essential for the PM to manage and understand in order to be successful on modern projects. The first of which is context. Now, this refers to all external factors that have an impact on the project. Context factors can be some of the most difficult to predict and manage. Context includes stakeholders, environmental issues, legal and legislative requirements, and local issues and project-specific factors. The second of which is financing. Now, it's no longer sufficient to merely know the project's cost. The owner must know how the project will be paid for and integrate that knowledge into the scope of work. The mechanisms for financing can have a direct impact on the project design, the speed with which the project can be delivered, and the ability to achieve contextual requirements. Projects are often allocated a fixed cost profile which must be adhered to. This impacts every aspect of the project's management. So the intrinsic complexity of projects in part is driven by political, social, technological and environmental issues, as well as tight fiscal pressures, end-user expectations which may change dramatically during the life of the project, and government instability. Now, is the key to managing the landscape just managing these 5 aspects of the delivery space, or is there more involved? So when thinking about a project or programme landscape, many different challenges present themselves. Now, most PMs encounter challenges within these areas throughout their delivery role. It can seem never-ending and often unpredictable. You could have a very simple project, but if one element of this landscape is volatile, it can turn a simple on-paper activity into a very difficult task, requiring much more thought and active management than originally intended or envisaged. Conversely, you could have a highly complicated technical project or programme which actually has quite a predictable environment where change is slow and measured. Now, unfortunately, this is an incredibly rare circumstance, as most projects and programmes, however large, small, simple or complex, face a diverse and changing landscape. So based on some of the work that Cranfield University has been developing, it is possible to broadly categorise this landscape into 3 core areas, and I want to build on these areas throughout this webinar to help focus in on some potential approaches that might help in your project and programme's delivery. So these 3 core areas are socio-political complexity, structural complexity, and then finally emergent complexity. So let's first begin looking at socio-political complexity. So this is associated with the project's importance. The importance to the company, so is it strategically taking the company in a new direction? Importance to the stakeholders, so is the project changing the stakeholder environment in some way? What is the culture, both within the project and external to the project? And how does that impact on the approach that you would take? Are they at odds or do they actually complement each other? Now, within socio-political complexity, the 3 Ps come into play: people, power and politics. Now, this is both within the project team and then within the wider stakeholder communities. Behaviours often originating from cultural or political standpoints or positions of power and influence can directly affect, influence or even block a project's progress. How many times in your situation has a simple decision on your project been elongated by behaviours, politics or disagreements? Now, the actual number of stakeholders represents a structural complexity, which I will cover later. But within the socio-political space, it's the stakeholders' varying agendas which adds to the complexity. You may have thousands of interested and very active stakeholders, but if they have the same viewpoint and agenda, then they're going to be easier to manage than if you have a very small, very core group of stakeholders, with two groups holding very diametrically opposing views, causing agreements on the way forward on scope or delivery exceptionally difficult. So an important point that I want to bring out here is that every stakeholder has a view on the project based on their agenda and their perception of the project. Each program or project is unique, and each perspective is subjective. For example, a project manager may have a different perspective on the landscape of that project and its elements of complexity to, for example, a systems engineer, or even to an external stakeholder or customer of the project. Each person's view on what aspect of the landscape is causing the most pain to the team is a result of their experiences. Now, this is an important point to bear in mind, as your personal view of complicated to manage may be another person's view of a simple, straightforward situation. And it's this difference in opinion and perspective which should be taken into account with all elements of project management, especially within a project's stakeholder and communications management plan. So the key question for you to consider is, how are you validating your perception of the landscape you're operating in? And how can you assess your stakeholders' perceptions? Try having open and collaborative discussions on landscape perceptions, helping to clarify and potentially resolve confusion and conflicts. Understand each other's perceptions and perspective, and then review and revalidate these perceptions regularly with the stakeholders to avoid unnecessary conflicts or confusion. So let's now move into structural complexity. So here we consider the size and pace of work. A large project running at a slow pace may not be as difficult to manage as a small project running at a high pace. The faster the pace, the greater the resource intensity, and therefore the more complex the project is to manage, albeit for a limited time. Now, time itself is an important factor. How much time is the project or program spanning? What level of obsolescence needs to be planned? Or is obsolescence a key area of unknown simply due to the long time span of the project or program's evolution? We also need to consider variety and breadth of scope, as well as the level of interdependence of people or tasks. Are people geographically co-located, or are they located all around the world with different time zones to consider? Are the tasks within the project or program highly interdependent? Or can they run in parallel with minimal impact on each other? So here we consider constraints. Are there high levels of regulation for you to consider? Are there fixed funding profiles per financial year to consider? And do these financial profiles change without consultation, or can they be guaranteed? So structural complexity is one of the most easily recognizable of the complexities and can be basically represented by the level of technical challenge within the development of a system, or the complicatedness or level of interconnectedness of the system or systems of interest. And it's this level of interconnectedness which heightens the importance to establish the core link between the systems engineering lifecycle processes with project management processes. So as highlighted, planning and control are two critical areas which reside in both frameworks. Therefore, project planning and control must take account of both systems engineering approaches and project management approaches. So to provide a top-level overview, systems engineering philosophy is underpinned by three important points. The first of which is you cannot optimize a system by separately optimizing its components. The second is focus on defining customer need and required functionality early in the development cycle. And the third is understand the whole problem before you try and solve it. Successful projects tend to have a high degree of upfront scoping and planning. So if you think back to the APM lifecycle at the beginning of this presentation, as time progresses, we're moving up through the life cycle. We're actively aiming to reduce uncertainty by firming up what we need to deliver and then how we're going to deliver it. So if we fail to follow this good practice and we fail to provide the project with an adequate upfront scoping period, then we're undermining the systems engineering philosophy, rushing into a problem that's not fully understood and the customer needs are not fully defined. Scope may not be able to be fully defined to the lowest level of detail up front. However, the problem that the project or program is trying to address should be understood and commonly understood by key stakeholder groups, specifically the customer. So the customer needs can then be refined with a continual focus on the original problem statement, which is the reason for the project's existence. Within the systems engineering domain, it's also an important factor to consider whole system testing in the planning process throughout the project to ensure that the solution is fully tested before delivery. It's common to significantly underestimate the importance of whole system testing and integration, and often this is a stumbling block for project plans. So when the team reaches integration and acceptance testing, unforeseen issues come out of the woodwork, causing delays and rework. Now, by ensuring that we leave adequate and frequent iterative whole testing periods in our planning, we can minimise the risk, clarify customer expectations as we go. So my questions for you is, how are you testing that you're moving in the right direction? How are you ensuring that your customer is gradually accepting aspects of your delivery as you go along? And then finally, how are you trying to mitigate last-minute surprises or rework? Now, I've mentioned requirements management as a key aspect of managing your environment. Now, upfront early project requirement definition can benefit a great deal from applying some of the DSDM Agile approaches, such as the Moscow prioritization method. So this prioritization model takes each of the requirements and assigns it a criticality of, first, the must-haves. So these are the requirements that are completely non-negotiable. Without them, the project will not provide a solution to the customer's problems. The second is the should-have requirements. Now, these are the requirements that are still important, but with some pain could at worst be taken out. However, there would need to be workarounds and the stakeholder management and buy-in to remove these requirements from the scope of the project. The third of which are the could-haves. Now, these are what I would like to call the nice-to-have requirements. Without them, the project solution will still deliver. However, there is value to adding these requirements in for a more complete system. These are the requirements where, if time becomes tight, are the first to be cut out of scope. Then finally, we have the won't-haves. So these are the requirements that have been agreed by the customer and the project team, which are non-essential and are therefore been left out of the scope of the project deliberately. Now, this is not to say, however, that if the project is awarded an extension or if there's a delay elsewhere, then some of these non-essential requirements cannot be added at a later date if they don't detract from the main project priorities. Now, this type of approach could be flowed down through all of the subsystems of the project to ensure that there's a consistent prioritization approach which is clearly communicated and agreed with systems engineering and the customer and documented accordingly. This allows for flexibility within the project in its approach to development without deviating from the scheduled end date, which is often immovable in certain projects. So my question to you is, do you understand which requirements in your project or program are your must-haves in the customer's perspective and which are your could-haves? And have you reflected this in your planning? So essentially, if the socio-political and structural aspects of our environment could be fully understood by our teams, then surely success is bound to be ours. Unfortunately not, because then things start to change. And that leads me on to the final area, which is emergent complexity. Now, fundamentally, this covers uncertainty and risk. So uncertainty can be from the result of a lack of experience. Now this is either the team's lack of experience within the domain or the company's lack of experience in delivery in this type of project. Uncertainty can be from a result of a lack of availability of information. What does the customer want? What changes will there be in the technological aspects of the design that we don't know about? Who's going to win the next election and what impact will that have on our funding streams? Uncertainty can be from the result of the novelty of technology or process. So is the process or program unique? Is it a first in its field? Is this project strategically bold? Is it going in a new direction, utilising new processes or technologies in existing markets? So uncertainty can be made up of one or multiple facets of a project's makeup. Change, on the other hand, appears to be becoming more and more inherent. So changes in the requirements, changes in technology, changes in the stakeholders and in the organisation itself tend to be inevitable and therefore must be managed accordingly and planned for. Emergent complexity is caused by a potential or actual change in either the structural or socio-political environment. Now you'll probably start to think that there's a clear overlap between emergent complexity and risk management as we try and quantify the impact of these emergent aspects of our environment. So my question is, in your risk management, do you consider your emergent risks? Do you consider your whole landscape, or are you just focusing internally within your project team? Now emergent complexities often require trades. You can only ever fix 2 of 3 points of the PCT triangle. If you're fixing time and cost, then a trade in scope may be required. If scope and cost is non-negotiable with the customer, then the trade must be on time. So trades down at the project level tend to be more easy to quantify and easy to measure and compare. They are often like for like. For example, for a certain time and cost, I may be able to give you this specification, but it won't have that specific requirement you've asked for until a later release date. At a program level, however, these trades often become much more abstract. So a colleague of mine usually describes this as the trading of apples and Wednesdays. So within defence, the acronym TEDOIL is often used to identify capability. This stands for training, equipment, personnel, information, concepts and doctrine, and organisation, infrastructure and logistics. Now at a program level you may be faced with a trade between any of these aspects, each with a different measure and each with a different impact to the successful realisation of the benefits for the program. Finding the optimal balance between each of the aspects at a program level, especially when addressing capability, can often be an iterative cycle where there may not be a right answer. Once you have a clear view of the landscape, you can begin to look at the level of control and the level of influence that you have over each landscape aspect. Now projects typically like to be in the product development / solution space, where there's a high degree of control but very little influence over the design and the development aspects, as these are already predefined by the program. At the end of the control spectrum, change is seen through standard change control processes and are often just refinements and adjustments rather than large-scale change. This puts the project in an ideal position in terms of the APM project lifecycle, as gradually uncertainty as to the what and the how reduces as the lifecycle progresses. In managing more complex and uncertain programs, on the other hand, the program team often feels like there's very little control over their program and its context. As I referred to in the previous slide, there are often abstract concepts that need to be translated to the definition and delivery of products and services that would result in the successful delivery of the program. The program team begin with very little control over their program, with emergent and iterative development cycles resulting in a very uncertain and intricate environment. Now often these intangible trades are required, and these trades may not have similar methods of measurement. And it's in this space where benefits and value need to be fully understood and prioritised by the wider team. As values and benefits understanding refines, and the programme team's understanding of the environment and the context refines, the level of control that they can begin to exert increases, pushing them more into this middle space, where there is just the right amount of control to be able to control some elements of the environment and influence others. And with further work and definition, the sub-level projects can start to refine their requirements and transition into a more proactive place where control increases as understanding grows. Now it's important to point out here that transition can only be achieved through clear, informed decision making, allowing the programme to take a step away from the abstract space and a step towards the product service delivery and achievement space. Now this transition can only be achieved through the use of common language through the project stakeholder map. If your customer's view of what a requirement means and the project team's view of what a requirement means differ, then the project will not be properly in control. It may think it's in control until it delivers the product and gets a short, sharp shock when the customer says that it's not fit for purpose. So in light of that, what steps can you take to identify your areas of control and your areas of influence? And how can you work towards strengthening those as a team? So that's all well and good. We now understand the environment. However, what can we now do about our newfound understanding? And what's the next step? Essentially, my view is the way to make progress is to make decisions. You want to make the right decision at the right time, which seems easy on paper, doesn't it? Now this is where project controls and data can be your friend or your enemy. Now let me draw you a journey. So we start off with lots and lots of data on what has happened on a project or program. We do status updates and reports saying what has happened in the week, the month, the year. It's great. We then, if we're undertaking some analysis on our progress, begin to look at why what happened happened. So why did we go over budget in a certain area? Why did we slip behind schedule? And why was one particular area delivered so early without any of the predicted problems, yet another area was full of unforeseen risk? So this analysis is typically what I witness most projects undertaking. Looking backwards at their management information and conducting some diagnostic analysis using a baseline, actuals and a forecast. So this is what I call management information. Whole cottage industries of what I call the handle turning can be sustained just producing these reports. We could go through a whole duration of the project life cycle generating this management information. We feel like we're reporting loads, therefore we must be in control. Then why are our variances getting bigger and bigger? And why are we still hitting surprise delays? Unless we take the jump from historical diagnostics to predictive analysis and prescriptive analytics, then we're wasting all of the good data that we're generating on our project. The question that we should be asking ourselves is what is likely to happen? And most importantly, what should I then do about it? Project controls and planning should strive to provide information to ensure that the project is doing things right and then, more importantly, doing the right things. Backward-looking historical data is still used in this proactive predictive analysis, but instead of justifying why things have gone wrong, it's then used to predict potential problems or bottlenecks in the future. For example, I have a project that's historically been behind schedule. The team has never been at full capacity due to recruiting issues. My questions are, is this likely to continue? If we can't resolve the recruitment issue, then if I extrapolate the rate of productivity to the project end date, does that result in a slip to the delivery date? And will that be an issue with my customer? If it is, then is there something that we can do to minimise it? Perhaps an alternative way of working, a de-scoped design to ensure delivery by a critical date? And are there pieces of a product that we can order early in order to reduce the long lead times? So it's by utilising robust project data and converting it to management information, which can be utilised to undertake scenario planning and risk mitigation strategies. The team are then minimising the impact of the emergent complexities of the environment. So my challenge to you is how much of your reporting is forward-looking and proactive, and how much is historic and diagnostic? And are you using the lessons from your history to affect your future? Then a word on making progress. So let me present a scenario which I'm hoping is familiar to most people. So we're halfway through a project, and a program is trying to understand why one of its projects has suddenly slowed right down in terms of progress and is struggling to close out activities. Progress began rapidly, and then over the last few months has begun to tail off. Why is that? The team are working just as hard, but there seems to be unforeseen snags that need addressing before the project can claim completion on critical activities. So what's the result? Numerous months of activities been stuck at that magical 90% complete point with no clear route to completion, and the project's progress stalls. Initial performance optimism is an easy trap to fall into. Let's claim the quick wins up front to demonstrate early progress. So the last point that I want to leave you with is to understand up front what success looks like, and then how to achieve it. Have those upfront agreements on what the successful completion of a task or milestone looks like and the steps that you need to get there. So on the slide I've given a really simple scenario just to demonstrate my point, but instead of relying on people's judgment and optimism on how quickly they are progressing through, in this case creating a document, add in tangible, not up for debate milestones along the way to objectively measure progress. This avoids the optimism bias that we all suffer from, the, oh, this job won't take long, I'm nearly done approach, and then spend the next month trying to get the document finalised and agreed by key stakeholders. So don't fall into this trap and make sure that everything from top-level requirements right the way down to the tasks in your schedule have clear, tangible, objective measures of success that everybody signs up to and that everybody has visibility on. So that brings me to the end of the webinar content. Now I just want to summarise, and if I want you to take away anything from this webinar, it would be these key 5 things. The first of which, map your environment and validate perceptions. So it's all well and good understanding your viewpoint, but what about the perceptions and perspectives of others? Do your team share a common viewpoint on the environment? Do you then agree with your customer on that interpretation of the environment? And make sure that you're validating these perceptions on a regular basis. It's all well and good doing it once, but you need to keep on doing it iteratively throughout the life cycle. The second is understand your priorities. Have you had the conversation about what is important on your project? Is your delivery date non-negotiable? Is your budget sacred? If so, what is your prioritisation when it comes to scope and requirements? Have the difficult conversation about must-haves versus could-haves up front with your customer and plan accordingly. Minimise risk by developing must-haves early, testing early, and gain initial customer confidence in your abilities to deliver. My third point is that change happens. Understand your areas of influence and your areas of control in the emergent areas of the environment. Via risk management, can you minimise the impact of changes and uncertainty? Can you slowly begin to gain more control over your environment through proactive activities to influence outcomes? My fourth point is do things right and do the right things. Make sure your project controls is king and is not a cottage industry for backward-looking reporting. Look forward and use the management information to make proactive decisions about the future. Ensure your management reporting reflects this proactive decision-making philosophy so that you can not only do things right, but you can ensure that you are doing the right things. And then finally, subjectively measure progress. Don't be that project manager or account manager that races to the 80–90% mark, then stays there for months on end with no progress. Be realistic. Agree what success looks like upfront with key stakeholders and document it in your plans. Then there are tangible milestone markers that you can use to demonstrate tangible progress. Now, this may not entirely remove the optimism bias from your environment, but it can help to add a degree of realism.
He was talking about DSDM, and some people might not know what DSDM is. Okay, I can help out on that one. DSDM is one of the Agile methodologies, okay, of which there are many. People often think Agile is a methodology, and it isn't. Agile is a framework or a way of thinking. DSDM is one of the methodologies. There's other ones like Scrum, which is used for IT projects in developing software. There's also PX, extreme programming, to name a few. So DSDM is just one of the methodologies. The majority of them still use the Moscow technique, the must-haves and should-haves. So I hope that answers that particular statement.
I think just to kind of add on to that, I think that even if you're not using an Agile methodology on your project or your program, you can still kind of cherry pick from some of the best practice that Agile has to offer. So you could do your Moscow prioritization without actually using full vanilla Agile philosophy. You can just cherry pick bits that are going to help you gain control and deliver more successfully.
Exactly, and there's a few people commented on that. Roger says, for most projects I run, it's either must have or won't have, should have and could have need to be moved into the above two camps before starting the work. I guess that the key difference here is between Agile versus Waterfall. So, yes, he's right, you need to identify them at the beginning, but when things start to, or you start to get to the end of the project and, things start to go wrong and you need to start seeing, well, how can we get this across the line, then at that point, that's when you start to look at your should-haves and your could-haves in terms of, well, which of these do we actually need? And what Agile does, Agile focuses on what the highest priorities are, and obviously these are the must-haves. Where Waterfall tends to want everything clearly defined up front, Agile becomes a little bit more fluid as you move along.
And I think that situation is quite a common situation in the fact that up front everybody wants everything as a must-have, but I was on a project that had that exact scenario, and as we got towards the end, the end delivery date was absolutely non-negotiable, and as we got closer it was very apparent that we weren't going to be able to deliver all of the must-haves. And if we'd have done proper prioritization up front, we would have saved a lot of politicking and backward and forward stakeholder engagement, and we wouldn't have wasted as much time trying to understand what we could de-scope and then what we could deliver at a later date, because we'd have had those difficult conversations up front.
Yeah, exactly. There was another comment. I think this is more of a comment than an actual question. You mean objectively measure progress? Subjective measures are often what cause the problems. So I don't even want to reply to that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, as far as progress goes, a lot of people would have different approaches to measuring progress. So often it's down to personality bias. Some people may be more optimistic on how they're progressing through an activity than others, and I think it's taking that person bias out of the equation and actually having proper, tangible milestone points along your tasks that everybody recognises, that you can say, okay, I've not got to this point, therefore I can't claim more than this percentage.
Yeah. Well, what we tend to use rules of credit in terms of you have to have demonstrated something to say, yes, I'm 50% complete, then there'll be a rules of credit associated with that. The Earned Value Management Handbook also has earned value techniques in there, and that mentions a few others. You know, typically you have 0 or 100, which is you've either done it or you've not done it in terms of a rule of credit, and there's many others as well. In fact, Agile normally uses that approach in terms of monitoring progress, either in terms of the stories, either the customer accepts it or they don't accept it, so your progress is 0 or 100, you either earn the points or you don't. So, yeah. So, whether it's subjective or objective, really it should be objective, shouldn't it? You've actually demonstrated that you've achieved that success criteria. Okay, right, I'll try and find another question. To what extent should all decision making be informed by an understanding of current risk exposure and predicting future risk exposure?
I mean, I think it's a tricky one. Decision making, I think you've got to decide what your risk appetite is as a project, as a program, as a company even. Different projects and different programs will have different risk appetites to others. So there may be some people, some scenarios where actually agreeing to run with the risk and not making any decisions and making that decision to tolerate the risk may be the suitable decision-making output, whereas others, an organisation may be wanting to minimise their risk on one of the projects which may be strategically important for delivery or something, and they may take a more proactive kind of risk mitigation response to it. So I think without the context, it's difficult to really answer that question. I think it's a case of understanding your environment and understanding what the risk appetite is.
Come a bit slow. Right. How many points can you fix in the Pentagon PCTCF for successful delivery?
Again, I think it depends on your context. I know that there's always a will to pin down as many points as possible, but I think then reality takes over and something somewhere has to give. And I think instead of focusing on which ones you can fix, try and focus on which one's the one that's going to be your negotiating pawn. So are you going to negotiate on time? Are you going to negotiate on performance, or are you going to negotiate on cost? I think it's having that in the back of your mind to say, right, which is the absolute most sacred thing to the customer? Is it delivering by date X? Is it coming on under budget Y, or actually is it achieving performance, this certain performance level bar that we need to do, and actually understanding the reasons and the rationale behind that helps you to understand where your trading space is, because I think all of this is all about trades, and I don't even think you can necessarily fix all of them, but some will be more concrete than others.
What aspects of projects fail outside the project management control but is essential to project management? Where is this captured in the landscape?
So I think what he's referring to there is dependencies management. So you could argue that that's either within the emergent stuff, because if it's an emergent dependency that's coming about, so for example, if when you started your project, other projects in your environment were all on time and on budget, but actually as you go through, delays outside of your environment is actually having an impact on your ability to deliver. So they could be argued as more emergent complexities, or they're the structural stuff. So when you're actually defining your requirements, you're upfront defining those dependencies, and then you should have a proactive dependency management plan where you're going and having those conversations with the external projects on a regular basis so that you've got a common understanding of what they need to deliver to you and what you need from them.
There's a lot of people saying, you know, they're in the same boat in terms of being stuck at 90 to 95% complete, and trying to get the project across the line, because then the client's turning around and saying, well, they want the could-haves and the should-haves as well.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the most common issues. I think sometimes the fault is in the project controls and the planning and how you actually build your plan, going back to the tangible criteria and things like that. And I think sometimes the fault is in the environment, in fact that the customer doesn't necessarily understand that he can't have everything and he can't have it all gold plated and have it 2 weeks last Wednesday. So I think it's making sure that you're engaging with your stakeholder community regularly, having those clear and difficult conversations, and actually utilising your project controls data that you've got to try and demonstrate why you're saying that you can't deliver certain requirements on time, or why you are over budget by a certain amount, and just try and make it tangible and make it visible via using your historic data, your management information, to enable your customer to make a proactive decision.
Often that turns into like phase 2 and phase 3 in terms of addressing the requirements. So you actually get something working quite early on, or something which is usable, and you can, you know, there's an element of success to it. How do you easily combine historical data with future outlooks? Are they in different systems?
I think it depends on how your systems are set up. So, for example, you may have a financial system that captures your actual costs. So, for example, your hours booked by your people and any kind of non-labour costs that are coming in, they may get captured on a separate system. But there's nothing stopping you then using that and kind of doing a bit of analysis with that versus your properly kind of logic linked schedule, and seeing whether there's going to be any problems. So I think that kind of goes back to some of the earned value philosophy. Even if your project doesn't do earned value, you can gain a lot through just having a look at your baseline, having a look at your forecast, and then having a look at your actuals, and doing some very, very simple comparisons to see, okay, are we behind where we said we were going to be at this point in time? If so, if that continues, what problems will we face? Similar to cost, are we over budget or under budget where we said that we went at the point where we are at the minute? If that continues, are we going to have any problems? How can we mitigate that? And so I think it really depends on how your systems are set up. Obviously, the optimal thing is to have everything integrated, but unfortunately most people don't have that, and they do have these standalone systems. But through doing some very, very simple kind of analysis, you can extract things and start to really have a look at those forward-looking indicators rather than always justifying why you've done what you've done.